So if big tech censorship wasn't enough, we got a new one for you. The government is going to start censoring your text messages. Oh wait, no, I misspoke. It's not the government. It's the Democratic Party. It's going to start censoring your text messages. That's right. Well, they're working with SMS carriers to prevent disinformation spread through text messages. So, nothing to see here. They're the good guys, right? They're just working to prevent misinformation. So, this is insane. This is a whole new level of Orwellian. We know that the big tech has been de facto town square for some amount of time. So people have been saying, hey, you can censor people for political reasons on these tech platforms, and that's not censorship because these are private companies. They're allowed to do it. And that's a totally fallacious argument for reasons that have been debated to death. But now this is them actually, your phone carrier is going to start limiting what text messages you can send. And it's not even the government doing it. It's a political party that's actually doing it. So, let's get into the weeds here. It's an article we're going through today by Politico, who I believe is the first to report on this. And we're going to be analyzing it with all the tools at our disposal. So, this is the 5-sheet for this one. You can see it's a little bit long because there's a lot going on, a lot to discuss in this article. Before we dive into this, let's quickly look at the 6 shape, give us a little brief viewpoint of what's going on. A little bit of opinion in there, not a ton, a decent amount of emotionality, pushing a lot of fear-mongering. Source anonymity, not much. They're really zero. They pretty much quoted all the sources they got their information from. Opacity is pretty high. They have some muddled language in there, seemingly for intentional reasons. Irrelevancy, very low. This is a story that everyone's going to care about. And the unknowability, pretty low as well. They do make some kind of vague claims. You don't know exactly how you'd prove it right or wrong. But for the most part, the 6 shape doesn't show a huge amount of misleading content there. But let's dig into the weeds, because there's always something worthwhile when you look at it in detail. So, we'll start out with the bias of Politico. I think they're fairly neutral. People on both sides are going to say they have their partisan bias, but the one bias that's undeniable is they're tied to the political establishment. The Washington insiders, the corporatist lobbyists, all those type of guys, they're the same class as the people who write for Politico. These are not some insurgent upstarts. They're the establishment. That's who Politico is most in bed with. Okay. So, the thesis, as I understood it, is that Biden is treating opponents of his vaccine as, quote, dangerous and extreme, and using more aggressive tactics. So that comes right at the beginning. The Biden administration is it's that first paragraph. Not much of a paraphrase there, pretty straightforward. So, then what evidence, blah blah blah. That stuff doesn't get too interesting till we get down to the named manipulation tactics here. And there are quite a few for this story. So starting out with intentionally confusing. So they take the most important paragraph in the whole story, and this is the way they present it. This is the thing I led with, about how the government is now going to start censoring your text messages, and this is the way they present it. Biden-allied groups, including the Democratic National Committee, are also planning to engage fact-checkers more aggressively and work with SMS carriers to dispel misinformation about vaccines that is sent over social media and text messages. The goal is to ensure that people who may have difficulty getting a vaccination because of issues like transportation see those barriers lessened or removed entirely. So that kind of sounded like a clusterfuck of information. He's kind of doing this or that. He's using fact checkers. We have talk about access and information, and who knows exactly what's going on. The way this should read is, the Democratic carrier is working with SMS carriers to censor text messages. Repeat, the DNC is working with phone providers to censor text messages. For a third time, the DNC is working with text providers to censor text messages. It is by far the most important story, and they don't get to the part where they actually mention the text messages till the end of this long run-on sentence that mentions like 5 other issues, and they immediately follow it up with this non sequitur about, this thing they've been talking about forever, how people aren't getting vaccine because they don't have enough access to vaccines, despite the fact that you couldn't trip over and avoid getting one of those shots in your arm. They're friggin' everywhere. So that was a misleading tactic, in that they take by far the most important part of the story, they bury it, decently down in here. This should have been the lead. This should have been in the first paragraph. And the paragraph they do put it in is muddled with a bunch of these other irrelevant topics, written in an overly confusing manner. So that's that first intentionally confusing there. Next one, undue emotion. They had a couple of these. So the quote is, Turning Point's other founder, Bill Montgomery, died last year from coronavirus-related complications. And so this was after they were talking about Turning Point was criticizing the door-to-door vaccination campaign. And then they just put that in a parenthetical. Like, what does that have to do with their criticisms of the door-to-door campaigns? This is just, oh god, well clearly these guys are wrong because someone in their organization got COVID. So that means that door-to-door campaigns are proper for in every way. Any criticism of them is wrong. It's like, no, the two have nothing to do with each other. This is just a purely emotional argument. So that's another misleading tactic right there. That another undue emotion. Let's see what that is. It's completely illogical, and it's potentially a death sentence. So that's saying people not getting vaccinated is completely illogical and is potentially a death sentence. That is just way over the top loaded language. Wait, is he talking about the 12-year-olds? What's the mortality rate for those guys getting COVID? And I mean, theoretically, getting the vaccine is potentially a death sentence. Remember cerebral vein thrombosis? People have died as a result of getting the vaccine. So saying something is potentially a death sentence is factually almost meaningless. Anything is potentially a death sentence. Crossing the road is potentially a death sentence. But framing it in this way is meant to ramp up your reptilian mind and just throw a bunch of undue emotion into the conversation. So that's what was intentionally done here as another misleading tactic. Alright, next one up. The statistics lacking context. As I've noted on many of these videos, statistics are one of the most easily manipulable types of information you can use. You could take the same numbers, present them 5 different ways, and come to 5 totally different conclusions. So the one they have here, this has been going around a few different stories, slightly different formats recently. 99.5% of COVID of 99.5% of deaths due to COVID are among people who are unvaccinated. So, what exactly does this mean? Vaccinated when? Depending on what vaccine you had, you're not considered fully vaccinated until 2 weeks after the second shot, or 3 weeks after the one shot, or, whatever. They have different... There's some ambiguity as to when or when not you're considered fully vaccinated. So that means if someone's trying to compile a statistic like this 99.5%, there's a lot of wiggle room for them to select the data sets that agree with them and ignore those that don't. So without them giving us, a skilled and honest breakdown, or a skilled and honest analysis of the stats, we're not gonna be able to know if that means anything valid. And they might very well have someone competent crunching these numbers, but at this point, I think we know that people like the mainstream media, organizations like the CDC, have not been honest in the way they're presenting these numbers. They've showed us time and time again throughout this COVID thing that they're overinflating, they're downplaying stuff when it suits their cause. They've lied time and time again, so we can't trust their numbers at face value. One other way that, just looking, without even looking at the raw data myself, just seeing that number, one other way that it could easily be manipulated is that we know the CDC changed the PCR cycle threshold for COVID vaccinated versus unvaccinated people. So whether or not you have COVID, they have a different standard if you've been vaccinated or not. So some guy will come in, get the same test, have the exact same results, and whether or not he's been vaccinated, they'll say, yes, you have COVID, or no, you don't have COVID. Exact same symptoms, exact same blood test result. So, would that play into this 99.5% somehow? Seems like maybe it would. But, again, we're not going to know how good that number is unless we had an analysis of those stats that were both, one, skillfully and thoroughly done, and two, honest. And what we have here is maybe number one, certainly not number two. Alright, moving along here. Straw man feigning ignorance. So this is a quote from Dr. Fauci. They included near the beginning of this article. Let's see where they put it in. So they have a little, just thesis framing it, and then they go right to the guy everyone we can trust, the guiding light, the North Star of COVID. Let's see what he has to say. The big misinterpretation that Fox News or whomever is saying is that they are essentially envisioning a bunch of federal workers knocking on your door, telling you you've got to do something you don't want to do. That's absolutely not the case. It's trusted messengers who are part of the community doing that, not government officials. So that's where I think the disconnect is. So, if you read this, he's saying it's, quote, trusted messengers who are part of the community that are telling you to do something that you don't want to do. Right? So the exact quote I have right here. Trusted messengers who are part of the community, knocking on your door, telling you you've got to do something you don't want to do. That's what Fauci claims this door-to-door campaign is about. And when a salesman tells you something is going to be so great and grand, odds are it's probably going to be somewhat worse than that. So if this is what the pitchman is claiming it is, odds are it's going to be even worse than what he described there. It just sounds insanely Orwellian. And I don't want nobody knocking on my door telling me to do something I don't want to do. Whether or not he claims that these people the government hired are trusted members of the community or not. And there's another disconnect here, to use Fauci's word, is that he says they're not government agents. So he could defend that by saying they're not, DEA agents or something. They don't officially draw a salary from the federal government. But from a legal sense, a lot of these people probably would be considered government agents or government actors because they're acting on behalf of the government. They're using training provided by the government. A lot of this is organized by the government. So whether, there's a doctrine in law of a government actor where if the government hires a contractor to go build a bridge for them, and then that contractor messes something up, then you can treat that contractor kind of the same way in certain legal situations as you would treat the government if they were building that bridge themselves. And by that standard, these guys look a lot like government agents. So that's two ways that Fauci quote was very much misleading. One other straw man they've got here. Mike Parson. Oh yeah, this is the quote. Mike Parson, who contended falsely in a tweet that government agents were going door to door to compel vaccination. So what part of that is falsely? That's Politico is the one saying that he contended falsely. What part of that is false? Is it the fact that they're not government agents, like Fauci said? Because, there's that workaround like we just discussed. Because even Fauci says that they're compelling vaccination, right? Or that they're making you do something you don't want to do. Is Politico arguing that is not compelling? Making you do something you don't want to do is different from compelling you to do something? Or is it just that they're not technically government agents? Either way, highly misleading. It's essentially a blatant lie. It's bordering on a blatant lie. What it is it's a lie where they can say, oh no, we're correct on a technicality. So the substance of what we're saying is wrong, but there's a technicality grounds on which we're right. So it's okay. Alright. So, yeah, that's it for the manipulation tactics in this article. There were a few substantial ones in there. I think, Politico is not the worst organization out there. The reason I selected this article was just for the substance of it. I mean, the fact that the government is gonna start censoring our text messages under the pretense of preventing misinformation about COVID vaccines. And then what next? It's so easy to say, well, next we're gonna... Oh, well, there are people texting misinformation about the January 6th riots. Some people are texting each other that it wasn't an insurrection. So let's just start blocking those messages from going through. Oh, some people are texting each other that Trump won the election. Let's stop those text messages from going through. Some people are texting each other that Biden is going to destroy the country. That seems really inflammatory, over the top. I don't see how they have any proof of that. That feels like misinformation to me. Let's stop those text messages from going through. It's insane that we're letting and it's not even letting the government censor these text messages again. This is letting a political party... Where's the line? I gotta go back to this. The Democratic National Committee That's the National Organization for the Democrat Party. Though they are the ones deciding what text messages Americans are allowed to send to each other. It's not even the federal government. It's worse than that. It's the Democratic Party is the one that's going to start being able to decide who's allowed to text who what. It's beyond unreasonable. Alright, last thing we got today, we're going to consult the Straw Council. So these are the 6 different voices I've come up with who roughly represent 6 of the major viewpoints in this country, and we can see how they might weigh in on this. So the first one up is Mainstream Mitch, very much just establishment GOP, corporatist, pro-war, pro-business, not too distant from Nancy Pelosi on most issues. Alright, what would you say? Allowing the DNC to censor text messages is a step too far. Any such censorship should be done in a bipartisan manner to make sure that every last American gets a vaccine produced by one of the pharmaceutical companies the U.S. has made financial arrangements with. Yeah, I mean, I don't think the establishment GOP party has much of a problem stripping away any rights from Americans, and they are just as deeply in bed with the pharmaceutical companies as any other part of the political establishment. Alright, next up, establishment woke. So this is all, the co-opted woke. This is the AOC Kamala Harris. Hey, I'm gonna give $1 billion I'm gonna give $1 trillion to the billionaires, but we're gonna appoint a black woman as the head of the committee that does it. This is historical. This is the first time in history that a black woman has been the head of the committee that gives trillions of dollars to billionaires. This is progress. So that's establishment woke. What would they say? Finally! If Twitter and Facebook won't shut down all these racist Republican voices, at least the phone companies should. I think they'd pretty much be just totally on board with this. If anything, they think we're not going far enough. They think text messages is just a start. They need to start interrupting voice phone calls if people mention vaccine hesitancy to their family members. Alright, next up, heterodox. A little bit of a crackpot type of guy. Might catch him in a cabin in a woods somewhere. Type of guy today, in today's political climate, aligns more with the right wing. But in like the 60s and 70s, you would see this guy as more of a left wing type guy. Anti-authoritarian, distrustful of big government. Alright. These sick bastards! We knew it was coming, so I just need to move all of my communications to encrypted platforms. And he's already halfway there. He already has all the encrypted platforms installed on his devices. Alright, Main Street Bob. This guy's about as apolitical as you can get in 2021. Tries to just live his life and keep politics out of it, but that's becoming harder and harder to do. Finds himself being drawn in all the time. Now what the heck? Some local folks coming to my door to talk about the pros and cons of vaccines. That's something I can get behind. But the government telling me who I can and can't call on the phone? That's outrageous. I think the vast majority of Americans would not agree with the government, or even worse, the Democratic Party censoring phone calls and text messages. Alright, then we got the MAGAnatic. This is, the America First, the pro-Trump MAGA guy. This is another step toward one-party rule. They already own the media. If they are able to federalize elections and add states to the Senate, now censor the phone cables? If we don't turn this around fast, we will be the next China. Pretty straightforward. He knows exactly where this is going. And finally, the true blue Bernie bro. This is the guy who genuinely believes what Bernie campaigned on. You know, what Bernie said early in the campaign before he endorsed Joe Biden and changed his tune a little bit. Come on, guys. We can't have the government censoring speech. Undo all the ways that the scales are tilted against us, but don't start tilting them in a way that seems good now. It will end up being used against real progressives. And that guy has his ideals. Alright, so we're about done here, but gadzooks, I mean, this is one of the most outrageous stories I've ever seen. Hopefully this gets walked back somehow. Hopefully this ends up becoming a major story and there's a big backlash over it. But if not, this deeply troubling times ahead if this is not walked back. Alright, well, let me know what you think about this, especially that Straw Council. That's the new tool that we're trying out. Let me know if you think that's effective, both to pick your own head and see about different viewpoints, see what different viewpoints might think, but also to force yourself to step out of your own biases and see how that might affect you. Alright guys, I will see you next time.